On Zoom or you're streaming on YouTube, Prabhu?
Zoom.
Zoom, okay.
It's a Zoom.
Shall I start, Prabhu?
Yes, please.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskrityam
Naram Namaskrityam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Tato Jayam Mudiraye
Tato Jayam Mudiraye
Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu
Nasta Prayesu Adveshu
Nityam Bhagavad Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Bhagavate Uttama Shloke
Bhagavati Utamashloke
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki
Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for having me here, Prabhu. My name is Rasa Sindhu. Nice to see you both, Prabhu. Do you both live here, Prabhu, with Prabhu, or are you visiting?
You're visiting.
You're visiting. Yeah. It's always a surprise coming to the Prabhu's place, and there's so many different devotees each time I come in. So it's very nice. It's a melting pot, actually.
All variety.
All variety, yeah. And it's been a while since I've been here, actually. It's been over 1 year, actually.
Another year.
About 1 year, yeah, since I came. So I'm very happy to be here. And I would like to start with some nectarian verses that my Guru Maharaj sings. And I want us to recite those verses, and then we can go into class. And we can just do call and response, or if you want to sing along with me. Just give me 1 second. Varhapidam Natabharavapu Karnayo Karnikaram Bibradvasa Kanaka Kapisham Vajayantim Chamalam Randranveno Radhara Sudaya Purayan Gopavrinde Vrindaranyam Swapadaramanam Pravishad Kita Kirti Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kabhibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuvi Krinantiye Bhurida Jana Krishna Kirtana Gana Nartana Kala Patho Jani Vrajita Sadbhakta Valihamsa Chakramadupa Shreni Viharaspadam Karnanandi Kaladvanirvahatu me Jivva Maru Prangane Shri Chaitanya Dayanidhe Tavalasar Leela Sudha Swardhuni Hello Dhunita Khedaya Vishadaya Pronmila Modaya Samyak Shastra Vivadaya Rasadaya Chittarpiton Madaya Shashvat Bhakti Vinodaya Samadaya Madhurya Maryadaya Shri Chaitanya Dayanidhe Tava Daya Bhuyadamandodaya Ya Kaumara Harasa Eva Hivaras Ta Eva Chaitra Shapas Te Chonmilita Malati Surabhaya Prodha Kadamba Nila सा चैवास्मि तथापि तत्र सुरता व्यापारलीलाविधौ रेवारोधसि वेतसि तरुतले चेता समुत्कण्ठते श्रीविष्णो श्रवणे परीक्षित भवान् वयसा कीर्तने प्रह्लादास्मरणे तदङ्घ्रि भजने लक्ष्मी पृथु पूजने अक्रूरास्त्वभिनन्दने कपिपते दास्येथ साख्यर्जुना सर्वस्वात्मनिवेदने बलिरभूत् कृष्णाप्तिरेशं परा आराध्यो भगवान् ब्रजेशतनयास्तद्धाम वृन्दावनम् रम्य काचिदुपासना व्रजवधू वर्गेण या कल्पिता श्रीमद्भागवतं प्रमाणम् अमलम् प्रेमापुमर्थो महान् श्री चैतन्य महाप्रभु मतमिदम् तत्रादरना परा मल्लानामशनीर्नृणां नरवरा स्त्रीणां स्मरो मूर्तिमान् गोपानां स्वजनोषतां क्षितिभुजम् शास्ता स्वपित्रो शिशु मृत्युर्भोजपतेर्विराधविदुषम् तत्त्वं परं योगिनाम् वृष्णीनां परदेवतेति विदितो रङ्गं गता साग्रजा कैवल्यं नरकायते त्रिदशपुर आकाशपुष्पायते दूर्दन्तेन्द्रियकालसर्पपतली प्रोत्खातदंष्ट्रायते विश्वं पूर्णसुखायते विधिमहेन्द्र आदिश्च कीटायते यत्कारुण्यकटाक्ष वैभवतं तं गौर एवं स्तुमा Jai Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
These are a collection of verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. If anyone wants to keep Srimad Bhagavatam 10:21:5 of the first, Bhagavatam 10:31:9, Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 2.2, Madhya Leela 10:119, Madhya Leela 13:121, again Madhya Leela, Chaitanya Manjush, Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Chandramrita by Prabodhananda Saraswati. So these are some beautiful verses which I often recite on a daily basis because it just sets a good mood of understanding Mahaprabhu, Krishna, seeing everyone in the same pastime and what's happening. And so people listening, I do see some people joining you, so welcome.
Take a look who's here.
Rukmini, I don't know if it's my Rukmini or your Rukmini.
Oh, that's a good question.
Let's
see. Okay.
And then 1 plus.
I'm not sure who is 1 plus AT.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have those eager to hear Bhagavatam.
Yes. Okay. So I saw the verse that you provided, Prabhu, that you have been discussing.
Yeah.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3:7-10. If I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let me open up that verse. Yes. Okay, I'll start and then we can do one or two more. Yadarthena vinamushya
Yarathena vinamushya
pumsa atma viparyaya
Pumsa atma viparyaya
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
Vidyata padrashtu
swashiraschedanaadikaha
Shivashchedanadika
yadarthena vinamushya
Yarathena vinamushya
pumsa atma viparyayaha
Pumsa atma viparyaya
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
Vidyata padrashtu
swashiraschedanaadikaha
Shivashchedanadika
yadarthena vinamushya
Yarathena vinamushya
pumsa atma viparyayaha
Pumsa atma viparyaya
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
Vidyata padrashtu
swashiraschedanaadikaha
Swashivashchedanadika Yarathena vinamushya
yadarthena vinamushya
Pumsatma viparyaya
pumsa atma viparyayaha
Patiyata upadrashtu
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
Swashirashchedanadika
swashiraschedanaadikaha
यदर्थेना विनामुष्या
yadarthena vinamushya
पुंस आत्मा विपर्ययः
Pumsa atma
viparyayaha
प्रतीयता उपादृष्टुः
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
स्वशिरश्चेतनादिकः
swashiraschedanaadikaha
यदर्थेन विनामुष्या
yadarthena vinamushya
विपर्ययः
Pumsa
atma
atma
viparyayaha
प्रतीयता
pratiyata upadrishtuhu
शिरश्चेदनादिकः
swashiraschedanaadikaha yat
Ya
thus
thus
arthena
Arthena
a purpose or meaning
a purpose or meaning
vina
Vina
without
without
amushya
Amushya
of such a one
of such a one
pumsaha
Pumsa
of the living entity
of the living entity
atma viparyayaha
Atma viparyaya
upset about self identification
upset about self-identification
pratiyate
Pratiyate
so appear
so appear
upadrashtuhu
Upadrashtu
of the superficial onlooker
of the superficial onlooker
swasiraha
Shiraha
own head
own head
chedana adikaha
Vedana adhika
cutting off
cutting off
translation by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Purport. A teacher in school once threatened his pupil that he would cut off the pupil's head and hang it on the wall so that the child could see how his head had been cut off. The child became frightened and stopped his mischief. Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the disruption of his self identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls those mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he ever lose his pure knowledge. In his pure consciousness, when he thinks a little seriously about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the mercy of the Supreme, and that his attempt to become one with the Supreme is a false illusion. Life after life, the living entity falsely tries to lord it over material nature and become the lord of the material world. But there's no tangible result. At last, when frustrated, he gives up his material activities and tries to become one with the Lord and speculate with much jugglery of words, but without success. These activities are performed under the dictation of the illusory energy. The experience is compared to the experience of once having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses his power to see. Therefore, if a man sees that his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and he has this knowledge with him. But artificially, he thinks that he is God himself, and that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya. This conception has no meaning, just as there is no meaning to seeing one's head being cut off. This is the process by which knowledge is covered. And because this artificial rebellious condition of the living entity gives him all troubles, it is to be understood that he should take to his normal life as a devotee of the Lord and be relieved from the misconception of being God. The so called liberation of thinking oneself God is the last reaction of avidya, by which the living entity is entrapped. The conclusion is that a living entity deprived of eternal transcendental service to the Lord becomes illusioned in many ways. Even in his conditional life, he is the eternal servant of the Lord. His servitude under the spell of illusory Maya is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is therefore put in the service of the Maya. He is still serving, but in a perverted manner. When he wants to get out of service under material bondage, he next desires to become one with the Lord. This is another illusion. The best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and thus get rid of the illusory Maya for good, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Daivihi aishi gunamayi mama maya duratyaya Mameva ye prapadyante maya metam taranti te. That powerful, powerful purport, very powerful words. Um, yeah, there's a number of ways that I was looking at this verse. But before I even go there, I think one thing I want to state, just a self-disclosure,
Yes.
in my process of self-disclosure. When the last few times I came here, I gave my classes. I think there's a tangible shift I've noticed within myself between the last times and then coming this time. And I think it's a shift that I'm seeing in all areas of my life. And I'll show you how it connects with the verse. And that's why these feelings and these thoughts are coming up for me.
Being here after 1 year, looking at your shift and transformation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of my journey and a lot of my Bhagavatam classes description, I think, has been a lot about just sharing what I know. And there's a lot of enthusiasm with that. I've discovered recently it's one of my core values, which is to share. I think I cannot live without sharing. I think it's just who I am, it's part of my nature, and I'm bound to accept, I'm ready to accept it, and almost designed my life in such a way that sharing is a part of it. And I think what was happening before that I've seen it within me was that sharing um, without fully understanding, just sharing, regurgitating a lot of things, presenting connections, intellectualizing, but still avoiding the heart, not bringing the heart fully. At least that was my experience before. And as I was preparing recently, going through this, it became very hard to prepare this time, because otherwise I would prepare and I would look into verses and Sarartha Darshini and let me get out how our Acharya is thinking and what did Prabhupada say, what did other Acharyas and Vaishnavas say. And I couldn't do it this time. I tried my best, I couldn't do it because it was not resonating with me at this point. And what became real was just to be real and be present where I am and present the verse with the understanding of where I'm at, actually. And so It's a big stretch. It's a big stretch, as we all know in this community, the importance and role of stretches. And so it's a big stretch in that capacity without coming with in-depth preparation, because preparation was not just in service, but it was becoming a way to avoid seeing myself fully. And so
To avoid sharing yourself or
To-
vulnerable.
vulnerably. So I wanted to keep it vulnerable, keep it share from where I'm at. And so with that, I didn't prepare much actually, which is very unlike me, because for me, it's an important part. As much as giving the class, the preparation is an important aspect for me. However, this time, I wanted to just go with my inspiration and see and be real with what comes out. So that's the self-disclosure before we delve into the class. I want to set a little context on where we are, why this verse comes up, and where we are going. So the third canto, it's conversations between, starts with Shukdev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj sharing about Vidura and how Vidur leaves Duryodhana and Dushasan and Dhritarashtra, and how he's disrespected. He's deeply disrespected. He starts with giving his counsel, and we know that Vidur is the younger brother of Dhritarashtra. Vidur and Dhritarashtra and Pandu had the same father. On paper, Vichitravirya, in reality, Vyasdev. In reality, they are all sons of Vyasdev. Vyasdev is an acharya. Is a prominent member of our sampradaya and in the disciplic succession. And Vyasdev is also the author of these books. And so Vidura offers his counsel. He tells Dhritarashtra that what you're doing is you're blinded. You're blinded in your attachment towards your son. You're not realizing. He even warned Dhritarashtra when Dushasan was born. Even at his birth, he said that this child was conceived at a very ill time. And this child is a harbinger for destruction. And you should avoid. However, Dhritarashtra was too attached. And some people argue that I'm attached. If I have a son, and if somebody tells me, a wise person, that leave your son, it's hard. However, Dhritarashtra was not just a father, he was also a custodian of the kingdom. And he was creating the container in which everyone lived. And so for him, it became not just his fatherly duty, but as his duty as the custodian. But he didn't listen. And Vidur kept quiet. He kept speaking up. Vidur wasn't like other members of the assembly when Draupadi was disrobed. Vidura was actually not there because Vidura had left before that. But other members of the assembly, like even Bhishma, even Drona, they didn't speak up. Individually, they were all powerful devotees. In a group setting, they didn't speak up. They were getting money, they were getting sustenance from Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, and they didn't speak up. However, Vidura was not like that. Vidura, whenever he had opportunity, he would speak up and he would share, and he kept on giving his wise counsel until it came to a point where his heart was pierced by the words of Duryodhana. When Duryodhana, and I actually have the verse also because I was keeping track of where we are. So the verse was 3:116. In 3:116, Prabhupada writes that, he translates that Vidura was pierced by Duryodhana's words. He felt so much pain in his heart from the words that Duryodhana spoke, that who is this son of a maidservant, and how can he counsel the future king? Who are you? What is your what is your authority? And Prabhupada writes in that verse. Actually, we can look at it, right? It's right here. 3:116. Yeah. Prabhupada says, thus being pierced by arrows through his ears and afflicted to the core of his heart, Vidura placed his bow on the door and quit his brother's palace. He was not sorry, for he considered the acts of the external energy to be supreme. So Vidura's heart was pierced. It's both these verses, this and the verse from today, are very Satpato verses in one sense. There are verses about the heart, there are verses about the presence, intention, purposefulness. In one sense, all of the Bhagavatam can be seen that way, but these are very specific in the topics that we discuss. So this verse, Vidura is fierce, he's in pain. He's in pain because of the words that were said. And yet he sees, and Prabhupada describes that how the material energy, how the external energy is considered to be supreme by Vidura, which sometimes we don't think that way. We think that, oh, there's the Antaranga energy, there's the Bahiranga energy, and Tatastha. Bahiranga is external, Tatastha we can decide, and then Antaranga is the internal, which is supreme, which is a little more higher. But Prabhupada actually writes in the last line of the purport, thus he left the palace before Duryodhana could act. Maya, the supreme energy of the Lord, acted here both internally and externally. And it's a very interesting verse about how Maya acts both ways. For Duryodhana, it meant that his illusion was so bewildered by the power, by what was yet to come, by the way he could control others, that in his external energy, how it acted was to be dismissive of others and to almost not even see cause of his own destruction. For Vidur, this same external energy moved him from within because he could see that how Duryodhana is being acted by the external energy and how he does not want to react to that external energy. So he left. And so he even considers the external energy to be supreme. And I was thinking that how, as devotees, taken full shelter and surrender, we even external energy can be worshipable. Sometimes we say, oh, Maya is bad, or we don't want to be in Maya. But the principle of Yukta Vairagya, Vidur is establishing it here, that he's seeing external energy also as an impetus to surrender more to Krishna, to see what's happening wrong. So the point being, in the sense of context, Vidura left at this point, and he said that this man is going on his destruction and I can counsel him. And he goes on his journey, he's traveling, and who does he meet when he travels? Who does he meet for the first time in his travel? Uddhava. Vidura meets Uddhava on his travels. And this is also an example that when in the Shastra it is given that when things don't go our way and when it's so much chaos, we follow in the footsteps of Vidura. We leave and we go to holy places and we get association. Balramji did the same thing when the Mahabharata war was happening. He wasn't present. He left because nobody was listening to him, nobody cared for his counsel, and he decided to get his association. So he leaves. So in his travels, Vidura encounters Uddhava and he asks Uddhava, and there's so much dialogue between them. He asks, describe what happened. How is Krishna doing? How is Rukmini doing? And Uddhava, in pain of separation, couldn't even speak. And then he speaks about how Krishna governed his life, how he lived, and then how the entire Yadava assembly fought and killed. Last time when I came here, I gave multiple reasons of why the Yadavas killed themselves and what happened.
21 reasons.
I have 21 reasons for
the
disappearance of the Yadus. And he continues his conversation, and then Uddhava says that I cannot speak any further. And of course, who appears in the assembly at that point? Maitreya, Sage Maitreya. Now, Sage Maitreya is a very interesting personality because, in one sense, he is a contemporary of Vyasdev. So, Vyasdev and Maitreya are contemporaries who both studied under Sage Parashar, which was Vyasdev's father. And Maitreya also happened to be with Krishna in his last days. Maitreya got direct instructions from Krishna, and Maitreya started speaking about those instructions. And so Vidura meets Maitreya, and Vidura starts asking all kinds of questions. And then Maitreya describes the Hiranyagarbha, Hiranyamaya form of the Lord, and then how manifestation comes. It's one of the best descriptions of the appearance of this world that I've ever seen. Maitreya's instructions to Vidura of Sankhya, because there's Sankhya that Kapila spoke, that we see in the Bhagavatam, and there is also Sankhya that Maitreya speaks. And to me personally, Maitreya's version seems more, I guess, approachable in one sense, less philosophical and more understandable. How do we conceive? He starts with the broadest definition and talks about how senses come, how mind emerges, how energies come out, how demigods are responsible. And it really sets up the whole context of understanding the world and coming to the point of how we need to be grateful for every single thing that's happening to us, because all these energies are responsible. And their conversations continue, and then finally Vidura asks, what does he ask? In this starting of this chapter, there's a few verses from 1 to 9. It's a lot of questions by Vidura to Maitreya. And this time he's asking that how could Krishna, the supreme complete whole, be impacted with modes of material nature? How could he be connected with modes? You say that the modes come from him, but he's supreme. So then how could something material come from something spiritual? And if it comes, then how could the material spiritual be tinged with material and yet still be separated? So he's asking all these questions. And he's also asking that the Lord, he was self-satisfied and detached, and yet he was playing. And so he's unable to understand these things. And then he also asks that how come the jiva, which is also pure, becomes impure? How does it happen? How is this possible in this reality? And he even says in the fifth verse, the pure soul is pure consciousness and is never out of consciousness, either due to circumstances, time, situations, dreams, or other causes. How then does he become engaged in nescience? So these are the inquiries of Vidura that he's asking. And then the Lord is sitting in everyone's heart. Then why do living entities face misfortune and misery when the Lord is right there as the source of all bliss, power, and knowledge? He's right there. And he says that my mind is greatly illusioned by the distress of this nescience, and I therefore request you to clear it up. And how in the 8th verse, Shukdev Goswami writes that Maitreya, when he heard this inquiry, he got agitated a little bit. He got agitated, he got disturbed a little bit. And he also got astonished. He also felt astonished that Vidura, I didn't realize that you would be asking these questions. But then the translation is, he replied to him without hesitation, since he was fully God conscious. Because he was fully connected with Krishna in a higher stage of consciousness, those emotions came, and then he started speaking the truth. And he spoke the first verse, the first response, which was the 9th verse, which I'm guessing you would have done yesterday or some point before.
Yeah, it's been about 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay, so 2 weeks ago. That certain conditions, so Maitreya response, that certain conditioned souls put forward the theory that Supreme Brahman or the personality of Godhead is overcome by illusion or Maya. And at the same time, they maintain that he is unconditioned. This is against all logic. So Maitreya responds that yeah, some people say that the Supreme becomes conditioned and then he comes into the material world. It's an argument that is used by a lot of impersonalists also, that the Supreme becomes conditioned. And so we also are Supreme and we are also conditioned. So the Supreme also does that, so we are all Supreme or we are all conditioned and we can. So numerous logic and numerous ways different impersonalists and different people have argued. And Prabhupada in the purport quotes Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti heavily about understanding this. And then he speaks this verse. And then Maitreya speaks. So now this verse for today, Maitreya speaks that the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Now that's how Prabhupada translates it. But when we go back to Sanskrit, so first, it's continuing because Prabhupada is writing in a thread of Maitreya's responses to Vidura's question. And he says that the living entity is in distress regarding self-identity. It's a question that we all ask. Who am I? Who am I? What's my purpose? What am I doing here? It's a question that I wear in my life. What is my purpose? These questions are from my spiritual teacher's book, The 4 Questions. Very interesting. I can get it on Amazon. It's a very nice book about questioning in life. And so the first question that he puts is, what is my purpose? It's the same question that we all ask. What is my purpose? It's the same question that Vedanta Sutra also answers with Athata Brahma Jigyasa. It actually doesn't answer, but it gives in the sense that the purpose is to inquire. It's to inquire. So the purpose is to keep asking. Yeah. The question is to be in the question. That's the main point. And so that's what Maitreya responds. And he says that the living entity has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Now, before we go there, I want to go back to the Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, it says, yat, thus arthena. Now, arthena is a purpose or meaning. Arthena means arth. Arth could also mean dharma, artha, kama, moksha, economic prosperity, and all of that. But it also means what is purpose. And so the question is that yat arthena vina, without purpose. Without purpose, a living entity, amushya pumsa, atma viparya, gets upset about self-identification. So the idea that we get upset about our self-identification, we don't know. It's because lack of purpose. It's because of a lack of purpose. And it's the entire point. That's why I think that this is such a powerful verse actually, because the entire point is about purposeful living. What does it mean to live purposefully? What is purpose? And then he says that pratiyata upadrashtuhu. He sees that upadrashtu means drashtu means to see, up means to closer, to look closely. Swashira, his own head, chedana adikaha, cutting off. So a purposeless person means that I don't have any self-identification. I don't know who am I. I don't know because I don't have a purpose. And how do I go? I feel like I'm a head person without a head. I see my head cut off. So it's another way of looking at that same verse. That sometimes in English we said that he has got a good head on his shoulders. It's a slang. It's a phrase that we use. And the idea being that we are connected. We are aware of what's happening. There's self-awareness. There's understanding. But when that head is cut off, that means there's no understanding, there's no purpose. I have no idea what I'm doing. And in English also it is said that we roam like headless chickens. It's like what's going on, what's happening. And so it's such an interesting verse in that capacity, that lack of purpose. So to put it into the context, the question by Vidura is, how does the pure become impure? How does the pure, the jiva, becomes impure? And one of the answers Maitreya is giving is lack of purpose. When we have purpose, when we know where we are going, when we know what we are doing, when we know why we are born, what is the reason for existence, how do we connect with the world, how do we connect with jivas, and how do we connect with Supreme? This trifecta, because purpose is never in isolation. A purpose can never be, oh, I have a purpose. It needs to be in connection with the environment we're in. And how do we conceive of the environment? There's the universe, there's natural things outside, there are living entities. And so we have a connection with them, with non-living entities, with living entities, and with the Supreme. And this trifecta of seeing this, that allows us to have a purpose. That puts purpose in a container, in an understanding that purpose cannot exist in isolation. And so once we have that, then the impure, the pure which became the impure, the impure can become again pure with having purpose. And so that's one of the key points that I found out here. Otherwise, we'll be headless and we don't know where we are going. The other way to look at this verse is also how Prabhupada writes in the translation that in a dream we see our head being cut off. And we see that, oh, my head is gone. But we are still seeing it. And so Prabhupada says that what a hallucination this is. That I'm observing my head being cut off. Then is my head really being cut off? Or is it something else? And so similarly, when we see this hallucination happening in front of us, that's other way Vidura answers that the self-identification actually, when it is with the body which we are observing and the head being cut off, that's where the distress comes. But when we identify with the observer who's looking, then the distress disappears. So similarly, in this world, when we identify with the world, that's where the distress arises. And that's why Vidura, he could see, but he was not distressed because Vidura was not identifying with what's happening. He was not part of the hallucination. He was seeing it, but he was not identifying with it. His identity always remained independent, always remained who he was. He was fully aware at each point in time who he was. Even when he was asking questions to Maitreya, and Maitreya was astonished. Why did he ask me that? Because Vidura is a humble soul, because Vidura is so connected with his heart that humility is a natural quality that emerges at that point in time. And when he sees someone who has direct connection with Krishna, who learned from Krishna, he naturally asks questions. And because of his spirit of inquiry, we are seeing all of these things. We are seeing all the texts appear. Another interesting thing that happens when Vidura and Maitreya converse is Maitreya mentions to him, or actually it might be Uddhava, that Krishna remembered you when he was leaving. And Vidura starts crying. He starts crying, his heart's pouring out. That, oh, Krishna remembered me? I am so insignificant. I'm not even connected with him that well. I didn't spend much time with him. I would see him come to the assembly, Krishna visited, of course, his home early in the beginning, but Vidura felt so disqualified that Krishna cried and Krishna remembered me when he was passing away. And so the idea being that Vidura was always in connection with his identity. We talk about be to have, the principle of being at the core of our existence, who we are, what are our deepest qualities, and acting from those qualities, and then of course having what those qualities bring into picture. And so the idea being that being fixed in our identity is a way to avoid the distress. Now, the distress, one can say that we can't avoid the distress because it's happening. Vidura is still impacted by it. Yes, Vidura is very much affected by it, and his actions are also impacted by it. And yet, he's fully self-satisfied with himself at every moment in time. At each point in time, he's connected, he's aware of who he is. A few things that stand out to me within the purport that Srila Prabhupada said is that.
Yes. But his
There we go. Hare Krishna.
No problem. Yeah. So Prabhupada starts the purport by saying that the teacher threatened his pupil that I'm going to cut your head off. And it's like, whoa. It's kind of a wild example if a teacher tells his students, right, we go to a seminar and Prabhu gives you an example, I'm going to cut your head off. Like, what? No. But sometimes a teacher talks like that. A teacher talks like that because so that it jolts the student that, oh, what's happening? Where am I? And sometimes Krishna's energy also does that.
Yeah.
It puts us in so much distress that we think, what did I do to deserve this craziness? What's so wrong with me? Why am I struggling? And it's a very real experience in that moment, because our identity is we are not seeing it from the lens of our purest sense of self. And so that's where it becomes this massive problem, this huge problem that I don't even know how to solve this, what's happening. And simply reframing it from the sense of our identity, just that act, it's almost the idea of alternative paradigms that we talk about in foundational course in the book. That when we take an alternative paradigm to evaluate that, oh, I am a jiva, this is my spiritual nature, this is who I am, then that entire situation, the Bhagavatam describes that this vast ocean becomes water contained in the footprint of a cow. That the most difficult situation that seems almost insurmountable becomes surmountable. Because our identity has shifted from a lowest level of existence, from we don't know where we are, because in reality, our head is not getting cut off. In reality, we are observing it being cut off. But if we are observing that it's actually not, it's happening in this hallucination realm. And so this huge thing becomes so small. And that's what Prabhupada is writing with this kind of a little gory example that I'm going to cut your head off. In reality, Krishna actually does that. Does anyone know any example of chopping someone's head off? In an assembly, what happens? Does anyone know any example?
Shishupal.
Shishupal. The example that comes to my mind is Lord Balaram and Romaharshan. It actually happened, now that I think of it, that Romaharshan was sitting giving a Bhagavatam class, and of course Balaram walked in, and everyone bowed down, and Romaharshan didn't, because Romaharshan was of two minds at that point. He was thinking, and again, see the point of identity. It's really boils down to our identity and our purpose. Now, Romaharshana was thinking that I am a Brahmin and Balram is a Kshatriya. A Brahmin doesn't bow down to a Kshatriya. Kshatriya is a warrior, a Brahmin is a sage. So a Brahmin doesn't bow down to a Kshatriya. So he was thinking that. Then he was thinking that I'm also sitting on the Vyasa-san. I'm the speaker. And if a listener walks in, I don't have to bow down to the listener. And he was also thinking that, but I am a jiva. My real identity is a spirit soul. And here's the supreme soul coming in. So I should bow down. So he had these two kind of line of thought happening. One, I shouldn't bow down. One, I should bow down. Again, see, we do have in action. What identity is at the core of his being? I am the body. That means I am a Kshatriya, I am a Brahmana, and I am a speaker. Versus the other identity, I am a soul. If he had, his being was, I am a soul, let me bow down. Well and good, but he didn't. He chose the second identity, which was the identity of the external self. And because he chose that identity, Lord Balram immediately saw this. And Lord Balram comes up. What does he take? What weapon does he use? A blade of grass. He takes a blade of grass. He comes in the assembly of thousands of sages. Vyasadeva is sitting there. Shaunak Rishi, these incredible sages are sitting. He comes, he takes that blade of grass and just chops his head off. And it literally cuts his head off. And everyone was said, "What the hell?" He was our speaker. He was our facilitator for the seminar. You cut his head off. Now what's going to happen? And at that point, Lord Balaram said that you'll find another one. And of course, that's when Shuta Goswami, his son, becomes the speaker. And they ask Lord Balaram, "This is unacceptable." And then he says that this is totally acceptable. I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he uses blade of grass to cut his head off to show, because Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells us, Trinadapi Sunichena, Tarurapi Sahishranam, Amanina Manadena, Kirtaniya Sadahari, that humbler than the blade of grass. And that's why Lord Balaram uses a blade of grass. And that's when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes and utilizes the same blade of grass as an example, so that we can see how it's all connected, and he chops his head off. And so the idea of cutting our head off.
Lord Balaram, he did accept some chastisement.
He did, yes.
He said, oh, from one perspective, it's completely acceptable. And okay, I get what you're saying, and so he did accept some.
He accepted and he left.
Yeah.
He didn't stay there because he knew that these are agitated sages. And so Lord Balaram leaves. And so it is true. And yet he showed by his example that what's needed. So the idea of cutting our head off, I think it's a very interesting analogy just to see. The other one that happens also in the third canto, or is it fourth canto, I forgot his name, Sati's father. What was his name? Daksha. Daksha also got his head cut off. Daksha got his head cut off. Again, question of identity.
Yeah.
And so the point I'm making is that the head gets cut off if we identify with the material self. That's when the head cutting happens. And it can also be seen as a way of buying down in one sense, because when the head cuts off, the people who got their head cut off, they became immediately humble. They became immediately connected with their spirit. I don't know what happens with Romaharsana, what body he gets. But we could see Daksha became very humble and supplicated and at his feet of Lord Shiva. So the example that Srila Prabhupada gives is that the child sees and he becomes frightened. And sometimes it happens that material energy may act in that our head gets cut off, literally and figuratively. But in reality, what's happening is it's showing us that who we really are instead of the body that is suffering. The other point that I liked from Srila Prabhupada's purport was Prabhupada uses the word when he thinks little seriously about his position. He doesn't say when he thinks seriously about his position. Prabhupada says little seriously. And so that really shows that this doesn't take a lot of effort actually to even understand this. It's just a little seriousness that we need in life. Not that fully serious, I'm a very serious person and I'm going to engage with life. No, a little seriousness in life. That we could still engage in our life and have a little discrimination of what does it take for me, where am I coming from, and what is my purpose. And in that question, the impure could become pure again with purpose. I wanted to check on time quickly, Prabhu. How much time do you have?
Oh, it's 10 of 9. Typically, class goes till, and you could complete now in 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's better. Yeah, starting around 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
I would wrap it up. Yeah.
That's standard.
Okay, perfect. So the other point I wanted to bring was that, the impure becomes the pure through purpose. Now, how do we get purpose? That's another question. How do we get purpose? How do I know what my purpose is? And the verse that stands out to me is from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Tatvidhi pranipatena vari prashnena sevaya dekshanti te jnanam jnanina tattvadarshina. So a tattvadarshi is a person who's purposeful, who's living purposefully. That's another way to look at it. It's a person who knows what they're doing, what tattva is, how to lead life. And so and Krishna gives two examples, three ways actually. In this verse, Krishna is giving 3 ways of connecting with somebody who has purpose. One is associating with them. Finding out if I am a headless chicken, how do I know where to go? To go with somebody with head who can guide me, who can help me. And so that's the first point of getting our purpose back. Because if we are roaming with our head cut off and not knowing where to go, which is a lot of this world actually, which is a lot of this world, including me, that I have no idea what am I standing for. And even if I'm aware of it, I forget. It's so easy to forget. I close Bhagavatam and then back into world, back into phone, back into this, or what's happening in politics and elections and this and that. Is so much happening. And so the point is to know that my head is cut off and I need to associate with somebody with a head. And somebody with a head is an acharya, is a teacher, is a guru. And I'm associating with them because they are living purposefully. They are fully living in their purpose. And incredible examples from our Shastra and our practical life from Prabhupada, disciples of Prabhupada, how they connected with Srila Prabhupada and gurus and got their purpose back. People who had no idea what to do in life, people who had no idea, just running like headless chickens, got their head back by connecting with those who have purpose. So that's one way of getting our purpose back. Find out who is living purposefully. Find out. And that's the little seriously that Srila Prabhupada talks about. That's the little part of taking a little extra effort that, okay, who is living on purpose? It happens in all walks of life. If you want to become a good tennis person, then we connect with somebody who's really played tennis purposefully, and then we associate with them, and then we become like them, and then we follow on their path. And so it's the same process in any walk of life. That's how it works. So even in the spiritual walk, where really the headlessness comes very clearly. So how we get our head back? By associating with them, those who have purpose. Number 2, pranipat, which is association, and of course surrender at some point, that I don't have a head, you do, tell me what do I need to do to get my head back. Second, pariprashnena, it's the process of inquiry. It's asking, and it's not just prashnena. Krishna could have written that with the pranipatena prashnena sevaya. He didn't say prashnena sevaya, he said pariprashnena sevaya. What does pariprashnena means? It means to constantly keep questioning, keep questioning. It's not that one question and I'm done. It's like constant. It's the process of inquiry. That's why Adhata Brahma Jigyasa, which means the purpose is to ask about your purpose in one sense. The purpose is to ask. The real question is to be in the question, right? That's the idea of being in the question and to constantly ask that question. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to be me? And Vidura gives the example by asking this. He knew, Vidura knew. Krishna remembered him when Krishna was leaving. People say that we need to remember Krishna when we leave. But imagine Krishna is remembering you when Krishna is leaving. That's the exalted position of Vidura. And yet he's asking, he takes the position of Maitreya, you associated with Krishna, you are clearly more qualified. You tell me, you guide me. So that's the part of the pranipad, which means to surrender, to humbly to listen, and pariprashnena. He's questioning and he's showing by his life. And then sevaya, pariprashnena, and then the third principle is sevaya, which is to render service. I am headless, I don't know what to do, but I put a little effort, then I can at least see who is with a head. There is at least some semblance of some understanding. And even if I don't have that, then I just follow somebody who's doing it. And then I render a little service to them. I render a little service, and then my head comes back, and then I know what I need to do in my life. And then Jnaninas Tattvadarshina. Then what happens? Then I start seeing, and then I start living on Tattva slowly. And then I'll start living purposefully, and then the impurities start disappearing. Because I've connected with a purpose, with a sense of existence in my life. One last thing that I wanted to bring that Srila Prabhupada talks about is the idea that why this happens. And he talks about it in the next verse also, but he gives the idea, this happens because of avidya. And this is a core theme of Maitreya's teaching throughout. It happens because of avidya, ignorance, lack of understanding. And the answer to Vidura's question is, it happens because you're in ignorance. And this avidya is not just a concept, it's really a phenomenon that happens. And actually the entire conversation, as we'll study this, we understand that it's a phenomenon that happens. It's not just that, oh, I'm ignorant. It's really a process that how it covers our entire body actually. Our deepest core of our being exists, and that's one of the ways mode of ignorance also comes, like not knowing, lethargy, And slowly it starts, it's like a slowly the living entities start coming out of it. And the entire thing, the pure becoming impure, and then slowly the impure becomes pure again and goes up and up and up. And so it's the symptom of being in avidya and ignorance. And then in the next verse, Srila Prabhupada talks about, or Vidura Maitreya talks about, that it's like seeing a moon which is in the sky being reflected in water. And when we see the moon in the water, it's trembling. And we're like, oh, the moon is faulty. Look, the moon is all shaky and it's not strong, it's not steady. Oh, you're looking at the wrong place. What you see is the moon, but it's actually not really the moon. It's a reflection of the moon, which is right there. So, which is the same example of the jiva seeing the head cut off, but in reality, the head is right there. The head has always been there. It has always been there. And so that's the other point of recognition, which is why if we think of it, that if I'm headless, how would I know? How would I understand? Actually, you're not headless. The point is to see that you have a head, but you think you are headless. And somebody is out there telling you that, oh, you have head. Oh, I have head. This is my head. This is my process. And this is how I come across and grow up. And so that's my understanding and reading of this. I didn't prepare. I wanted to, but all I did was just read the verse and connect and what's happening, because it was part of my own journey with purpose and with this questioning. And what I want to end this class with is first of all, of course, learning the lessons, having a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, find out those who do, ask them questions, be near them, and serve them. That way we'll get our purpose back. And once you have our purpose back, purity comes back into our life, and the hallucination and the distress that's all happening in some sense, it ceases to exist. It's there, but it does not impact us. And for me personally, it's a very important question. It's a question that I wear on my heart. It's a question that I went with earlier this year. I went to Jagannath Puri, Mayapur, and Vrindavan, the same trip earlier this year, which is very rare to do and rare for me to do. It's been a while since I've done all these 3 rounds in that order. And I went with this question, what is my purpose? And I kept thinking, what is my purpose? I said, to do this. In some sense, the purpose is clear, to be of service. That's the purpose. That's the ultimate purpose. But the manifestation of that purpose is different for you, different for you, different for you, different for you, different for me. How we render our service is that's where our uniqueness comes. Fundamentally, it's to serve. To serve the Supreme, we are serving the world. Prabhupada writes about it. And so I was questioning, what is my unique service? What do I want to offer? But at the end of that yatra, the question that I started with, which is what was my purpose? And it's so true to the nature of this verse. It became, who do I want to be? Mm-hmm. That was the question that I ended up with. And for me, the examples was seeing my teacher, seeing his godbrothers, disciples of Prabhupada. There's a very clear memory in my head. I saw my Guru Shishikya Prabhu and Vishnu Gada Prabhu from Philadelphia. They were taking a walk on Puri, Jagannath Puri beach at 5 a.m. in the morning. It was dark. And I could almost feel an effulgence from their chanting and their japa walking. And I woke up at that point and I was looking from my window. And I could directly see them on the beach, and there's the beach where, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu danced and left his body, and Haridas Thakur, he carried it, that's near Haridas Samadhi. And it became, the question shifted, the question became, who do I want to be? And I want to be like these acharyas, these people who are following like Srila Prabhupada, like our entire assembly. I'm reading their books, the writing of Narottam Das Thakur right now. And how Narottam goes and cries his heart out to Lokanath and discovers, help me. He goes to Jiva Goswami. And the question became that, what do I want to do from what do I want to be, which is also in alignment with be to have, and with really understanding that being a headless chicken, the purpose for me is to become a chicken with a head, and to find those people who have a head on their shoulders and to follow in their footsteps. And then all purposes and everything comes, as Krishna describes that as, what's that verse from Bhagavad Gita, that a reservoir of body can serve all purposes, just like what's that verse?
Some Pluto decays.
Yeah, exactly, that verse. That all purposes can be fulfilled once we identify what's the core, which is to follow along steps. So thank you very much for giving me your kind attention. If there are any questions, thoughts, and comments, I would be very happy to to take those and we can go from there.
Beautiful discussion. I was just thinking, why to cut off the head, not the hands or the leg?
Yeah,
So power, the pride goes to the head.
yeah, great point.
The pride goes to the head, and if the pride is set right, then we become automatically humble.
That's a great example.
Similarly, in the case of Vidura also, he was Yamaraj in his previous lifetime.
Yes,
And he became proud.
yeah,
And the learning what he had in this lifetime is to become humble.
yeah.
And the training was to be given from the very beginning of his lifetime. He became a Dasiputra.
Mm.
So in a way, what is my lesson to learn? That also defines the purpose.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
you have the bigger purpose and you can present the purpose in your life.
Mm.
And you can present the purpose in your life is by understanding what is the lesson I'm learning here.
Mm.
It's connected to a bigger goal.
Mm.
So for Vidura, it was to become humble,
Mm.
and that's why he was being humiliated in that kind of situation, that kind of a this thing. That's one example. And by cutting the head also means that when the pride goes to the head, it has to be cut off.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that point. That yeah, Vidura, who was that Rishi? Kandukya Rishi, right? He ordered as Yamraj that he should be lanced. And he cursed him that, okay, you think Yamraj, you think you wanna curse me? All right, you're gonna be born in the material world next life. And of course, Vidura takes birth as Yamaraj. And also that's also interesting because Yamaraj is present in two forms in Mahabharata. He's present as Yudhishthir and he's present as Vidura. And they're both learning a lesson. They're both learning a lesson because it's two qualities of Yamaraj that appear. One, which is that I can correct anyone, which is true, which is his duty, but then of course it's getting to the head, and of course he has to learn that lesson. And as Yudhishthir, he needs to learn the lesson that only upholding principles can be disastrous. And how only upholding principles but not seeing the practicality and reality, because Yudhishthira upheld principles almost to a fault, that's why Draupadi, what happened to her and what's going on. So Yamraj had to learn those two lessons. The other thing that this brings up is of course Brahmaji. Brahma in Brahma Vimohan Leela took away Krishna's God, Krishna's friends and Krishna's everyone. And Indra also did in some sense, both Indra and Brahma, they had a little, I wouldn't say pride. Indra, of course, had a pride because he destroyed the villages of Vrindavan and were pouring. But sometimes people ask that, whose fault is bigger? Is it Brahma's fault that is bigger or Indra's fault that is bigger? And the answer is that Brahma's fault was bigger. Because what Indra did, through his pain, he brought Krishna and his devotees together. But what Brahma did, he took away Krishna's devotees. And so that's why Brahma had to appear again as Haridas Thakur and really be humble. So the highest in the material world, this is classic example of the moon being reflected in the water, the highest becoming the lowest becoming that. It's such a theme in our Shastra. The highest becomes the lowest becomes the highest, and Brahma becomes the lowest, but then by becoming the lowest, he becomes the highest, becomes Namacharya. So thank you for bringing that point that it gets to the head and then it's the reformation and the lessons that comes and that brings. It's almost, I would want to say, it adds a color to a purpose. It adds a color.
In case of Brahma, he became illusion. In case of Veda,
he became proud. Yeah.
Illusion and pride.
Yeah. Thank you.
And also, in Brahmaji's case, I'm just thinking that how you mentioned that the Brahmaji separated devotees of Krishna.
Correct.
But in a way, also, the intensity of devotees of Krishna became even more towards Krishna.
Yeah.
Like the cow would become so intensely emotionally toward the cow, as if it is flowing toward Krishna.
Yeah.
And towards the other cowherd, like the gopis or the mother, they were feeling such a tremendous amount of love toward their children, which they would never feel. Similar kind of feeling they will have for Krishna.
Yeah.
In a way, it was like Krishna's design that he wanted to fulfill devotees' desire. At the same time, wanted to correct Arjuna's Brahma's illusion.
Yeah. Yeah, and Krishna fulfills the same verse. Multiple purposes are fulfilled by doing one action. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Rasa Sindhu Prabhu. appreciated your class and the discussion with Mr. Gopal Prabhu. Yeah, so I appreciated where you took us with this verse. I appreciated that you stretched yourself by not preparing. And then, so I, contemplating, like you really highlighted how identity and purpose, they're intimately connected. You brought in the be, do, have. This because, like, in our service, starting with myself, and whether in seminars or coaching or coach training, it's so much about, who am I? And or what's my purpose in life? Life purpose coaching, that's a big thing. And that they're just completely, absolutely not separate compartments. Add that my third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna emphasized, as soon as there's being, there's doing. It's not, well, there's being and then there's doing. They're separate. Well, we can think of them in a chincha beta beta that they're just, but at the same time they're one. And so we can think, well, what's my purpose? But without getting clear, or at least being in the question, who am I? Then it's then basically our purpose, in whatever language we might use, our purpose becomes to just be dragged by the material senses and material ego to gratify. I'm thinking the analogy, like, okay, if we don't, the car and the driver of the car, if we're not if we're not realizing, that's what I got from the beginning of your self-disclosure. That may be like your awareness of yourself. You were saying you would share information. It's a value of yours, but not necessarily with realization. So now you're valuing sharing with realization from heart, gut, soul. So like, if I'm not realizing that I'm the driver of the car, then I've realized my purpose is to fill up the tank with gas, and to change the windshield wipers, and just like that's quite shallow. So then there's the essential purpose of and Prabhupada talks about dharma and dharma. So essentially, there's the subsidiary dharmas. Essentially, though, dharma is that which cannot be separated from a thing. So dharma is that which cannot be separated from a thing. It's essential characteristic. So in a sense, let's say, sugar realizing it's sugar doesn't need to think hard about what's its purpose. The purpose is to be sweet. It doesn't need to try to be sweet. It doesn't need to first accumulate $2 million in a bank account, then I'll be sweet. So once it's, I'm sugar. A fire doesn't need to like try hard to be hot. That's its characteristic. That's its purpose. And so okay, in a general sense, our purpose as spirit souls is to serve. It's we're not going to get away from serving. We can serve in tamas, rajas, sattva, shuddha sattva, right? And so to the extent that we serve anywhere other than Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sajjika Bunai Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karyudai, to the extent that we serve anywhere other than in bhakti and transcendence, it means we're in that hallucination that our head's been cut off. And I like how you handle that. Yeah, Prabhupada would sometimes there's one lecture I heard, and Prabhupada says, so we're in material conditioned life, we're disconnected from Krishna. But then Prabhupada says, no, we're actually not disconnected. We're always connected. We've forgotten that we're connected. We've forgotten that connected. It's like sugar is always sweet, but in the analogy, sugar as a jiva, it forgets that it's sweet. It's still sweet. And so we're always connected with Krishna, and we forget, and then we serve the illusion that our head's being cut off. So just appreciated the being, the doing, intimately connected, for me, that relates to Sanatana Dharma, our essential characteristic, and realizing that, then realizing self-identity, yes, then naturally we fulfill purpose. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for sharing. Anything from online? Parampara, Prabhu, Devon? Yes.
This is Ramachandra.
Ramachandra, this way. Hare Krishna.
I think I connected a lot to the talk around identity, and I found it interesting how, right, it's so obvious, right? You all identify with something, and then that becomes your identity. And in that line of thought, I'm thinking, isn't it also like an extreme to over-identify, let's say, with the spiritual, and then forget your, just like Dharma on earth, how's it called? Like Svadharma, right? And lose your like physical head, like just remembered how like that unfortunate instance, and I think that was like in the 80s, one spiritual teacher, his head was physically cut off, right? So it's like balancing that game, and one of the acharyas was mentioning how we should see material life and spiritual life on two parallel tracks, right? So I'm like a lot in I think in the last like year or two, maybe longer, like in the question of how to balance these two like identities, how to find the unification between the spiritual and material. Like I'm here in this body, born in such place, traveled and lived in so many other places, and I can hypothetically have so many purposes linked with all these different places. And now, okay, I'm trying to serve God. How does that fall into the picture? And I want to keep both my physical and spiritual head.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. That sometimes if we don't see the context of where we are in, that's essentially what you're bringing. Because if we are a spiritual being in material context, then we have two contexts to live with, and we have to balance both the contexts. Otherwise, we can't be of service to either of them. If we just say I'm a materialist, then so the distress comes. Or if we just say I'm the observer and I don't have anything to do, then also another form of distress comes. There are examples of sadhus very elevated who actually are in that capacity, like our dutas. So there is a sense which is essentially the transcendent. But before that transcendence happens, and if we take it before, it's we talk about it also a lot of times, that is my spirituality getting in my way of spiritual growth.
In my spiritual mask.
Yeah, my spiritual mask. Then it becomes artificial, that I'm not there yet. I'm artificially being someone that I'm not actually, which is again the point of illusion that I've forgotten. So it's the idea of being real with where I'm at, which is that okay, I am in both the contexts. So I'm doing a disservice to myself and to my ultimate purpose if I'm just identifying with one and philosophizing it that this is it, or the other way. I'm a materialist, and even though I know some people, I get it, all this, that I'm a soul, this, but I enjoy my body so much. This is what all I want to do. And so it's really a game of balance between the two contexts until that such a point comes where one context disappears, which will eventually, that's the point. But artificially going there causes the illusion. That's what comes up for me.
But should they really disappear? Should one of them really disappear if it's two parallel tracks, right? Because if one of the tracks, which is there, disappears, then how does the train?
Well, at one point it will, right? Because we will not forever be in this material planet, in this material world. So until that impure becomes fully pure, then the material does not exist, so to say. Even though physically it may exist, like Acharya's the question was. So for example, we have the example, just to give an extreme example of it, even since I'm reading a lot about Narottam Das Thakur, he goes and he takes shelter of Lokanath Goswami. He lives in Vrindavan, he goes, and Loknath Goswami doesn't eat anything. He gets one or two pieces of salt, just little salt, and he would find it, or sometimes he would fast for days. So we could argue that, oh, he's not taking care of his material body. But the thing is, he doesn't have to. He doesn't need to, because he's already transcended it. It doesn't matter whether he is in it or not. But it's true for him in where he is at. Or like Raghunath Das Goswami, who would live in Jagannath Puri, and they would all eat and get prasad. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would say, where is Raghunath Das? He's not eating with us. And they would find him, they would never find him, and they would find him where they would throw out the rotten rice and rotten food. And he would eat those. And so in some sense, we can argue that how is he's not taking care of his body. But the point that the reason I bring this extreme example is that there is a point where we don't have to, because it becomes, we are, those living entities are so much in transcendence, in their full connection with Krishna, that they're able to survive and thrive without eating for days, without basic necessities. But artificially going there, that's the illusion. That's where the balance is needed. Until I come to, and that's where the point of where am I at in my spirituality? I'm not there yet, because Prabhupada gives the example. There are some of his disciples early in the days, they would sit. Prabhupada said, oh, where is that disciple? And he said, no, Prabhupada, he's chanting for 24 hours in Ramadan. Prabhupada said that does not work for you. That's not your position right now. And soon enough, that devotee came back or left or got crazy, because they tried to bypass the reality of the needs of the body. So that's the point, that there should not be a bypass. But it should not always be the point that both tracks should always exist, because at some point, one of them ceases in some sense, because it's only the higher existence at that point. So I just wanted to, contextualize it at present, and I want to see if
Well,
Prabhu's thoughts.
Thanks for the question, Ramachandra, and the response, Sindhu. Reminded chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, two statements from Krishna. One, he says, don't be a pretender.
Yeah.
And the other, he says, don't repress. What can repression accomplish? And we can see, like even many, if maybe most of those who they're truly transcendent,
Yeah.
still, again, chapter 3 Bhagavad Gita, he says, but they set an example anyway. So Srila Prabhupada gave a lot of attention to care for the body, right? The morning walks, the massages, the mustard oil.
Yeah.
He gave a lot. He didn't need to.
Yeah.
But to set an example, again, like the basic vehicle analogy, the car analogy. So it's irresponsible to neglect the car. It's actually responsible to care for the car, that it's in good shape and it's fit to carry us on our journey. And so we're not neglecting the car, and that it's clean, so that the car is the body, that it's we can say it's our body, but some realization, well, actually I'm just renting it, so it's Krishna's body. And to the extent that I have some drops of realization that this is actually Krishna's, this is actually for Prabhupada's service, then I'm not at all inclined to neglect it. To the extent that then I'm inclined to be balanced and care for it, but it's not just about me and my enjoyment. And so this is Krishna's car, and it's meant to be. It's actually a temple. Super soul's in the heart, Jiva's in the body. So taking care of the car, and then at the same time, if in the process of taking care of the car, I'm just completely absorbed in the conception that I am this car. I am this Toyota, I am this Mercedes Benz. Well, then that's not purposeful. So yeah, to responsibly attentively take care of the car on all levels, intellectual, emotional, relationships, physical, cultural, social, communicate on all levels, care for the car, while cultivating realization that I'm the driver, I'm not the car. It's not like contradictory, it's quite complementary. Hare Krishna.
Also, what comes to my mind to Prabhu's question is that those the two parallel tracks. Actually, they at one point of time material duties merges with the spiritual duties. So Prabhupada says he's spiritualizing the material duties, like iron put in a fire.
Yeah.
The iron is material in the beginning, but when it is in the fire for a long period of time, it becomes spiritualized. So even the material duties, it may looks like material duties now, but it will not look like material duties anymore when we spiritualize it. Although we may do same material duties.
Yeah, if it's really parallel, it's one, like in that sense, it's one, because it's working together.
Yeah.
When it's not, then trying.
Yeah, let it be with us. And then don't be a pretender, right? That's the point. Then don't be a pretender that, oh, I've already transcended. And that's where the biggest downfall happens. And sometimes it's asked that how come sometimes these incredible devotees have such a massive fall down? It's because the pretension reaches to such a point that they're pretending to be something that they're not. And so that's how the highest becomes the lowest, and they have to come on the ground and fall at the feet of Vaishnavas to then slowly realize where we are at. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any final thoughts? Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai,
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare